Well, this year's International Women's Day celebrates the tremendous efforts by women and girls around the world in shaping a more equal future. It's amid the COVID-19 pandemic, but also highlights some of the gaps that remain. I'm joined by the former Public Protector, Thuli Madonsela, to weigh in on this conversation. Good evening, Prof, and thank you so much for your time. Perhaps your own reflections on International Women's Day, and interesting that the conversation is about gender equality, gender parity, and yet we know that where we are during the midst of this COVID-19 pandemic is a worse off position and situation for many women, not just globally, but in South Africa as well.
Absolutely. Good day, Kathy, and thank you for this privilege. Happy International Women's Day to all the women of the world, but particularly to women of South Africa. We must acknowledge that for women in South Africa, Africa and the rest of the world, today is better than yesterday. But it could be much better, and you're right, Kathy. COVID-19's devastating effect has been borne primarily by women and girls. Gender-based violence increased during COVID-19. The majority of people who lost an income were women because they tend to have survivalist businesses. They couldn't go online. But also, the chances of being killed or attacked are heightened when there aren't many people in the streets or on the road.
One of the big conversations now is how do we emerge out of this crisis with different ideas that are not going to leave us in the world that we were in before we came into it. So when it comes then to the struggle for the full emancipation of women, what needs to happen differently in order to ensure that the status quo truly will be one of true reform and true transformation where women are concerned?
Well, at the Social Justice Chair at Stellenbosch University and at the Tuma Foundation, we say the answer lies in choosing to challenge indifference to social injustice. And choosing to challenge indifference to social injustice particularly targets the operations of government, the operations of business, and the operations of civil society. For example, the president has rightly praised women for having borne the brunt of serving humanity during COVID-19. But we also need the president to tell us that he's aware that women have been the hardest hit and tell us what will we do differently now. From the Social Justice Chair, we say what should be done differently is two things. One, let's have social workers in all of the municipal wards, at least 2 social workers in each municipal ward, to be aware of what's happening there to the grandmothers, to the girls, to women. What is the mental health situation of our country? So social workers, mental health, food security. The second part is when we plan laws, let's ask ourselves at the very beginning, how will this law impact on equality? Taking into account existing inequalities and existing poverty. Will it exacerbate the inequality that is experienced by women, particularly those who live at the intersection of other forms of oppression? And I'm talking Black women, women from the LGBTQI community, foreign women, girls, older women, rural women, and women that live in the townships.
In South Africa, one of the other situations that, of course, we're facing is that we have a lot of women right now who, in one way or another, are dependent on the state for survival in the form of grants. Do you think that there has been enough of a social security net created for women who find themselves incredibly vulnerable during this period. And again, taking into account the fact that for a good portion of the lockdown over the past year, the informal work that you were referencing, they were not able to get into that work, which means that the kind of income that they would have gotten, which we know goes and feeds many more mouths than the average income, they weren't able to access it in the way that they would have previously.
Absolutely. There have been efforts to extend social security nets to those who are left behind. An example is the 350 rand grant, and the fact that the other grants like the child grant and older persons grant were increased a little bit. But the answer lies in, again, the failure to plan beyond today. What happens after the 350 rand grant is done? But secondly, a lot of women did not get the grant because the system was planned for people who are fairly sophisticated. I remember when in Manzimeleni, one of our ambassadors went there, and to my ambassador found a lot of people had not received the grant. He tried to help them as a group because our chairperson, Thuli Madonsela, said, let them be registered as a group, and paid the ambassadors to do that. And the system refused to register them as a group. And therefore, when we plan services, we have to plan them at the level of Kokoslamini. People are not averages. Our government services, our government policies should meet people where they are. Just lastly, related to that, social development needs to be overhauled. It has never been social development. We renamed it. It's still a welfare department because it throws money at the problem. Like right now, we've said we've extended 350 rand grant temporarily. What happens when we withdraw it? Because we haven't put anything in place. Other countries are looking at food gardens. NGOs such as Tuma are saying, let's make sure that people are taught and given seeds so that they create food gardens, urban ones, rural ones, so that when some of these grants are withdrawn, nobody goes hungry.
One of the issues that we also reflect on a day like today is, of course, expanding the opportunity that is offered to women in different spheres of their lives, who are different races, who come from different religious backgrounds. Do you think that as a society we're getting better at that?
As I said, today is better than yesterday, but we do need to improve the planning side of it. And I'm glad that they're advertising new positions in the Planning Commission, because the Commission in the last terms focused on monitoring, but it wasn't created as a monitoring commission, it was created as a planning commission, and it can assist government to make sure that we have a very clear strategy on how are we going to help people to become self-reliant. How are we going to make sure that we reduce poverty, we reduce hunger, and we improve food security, and we improve people's safety. All of that should be part of an integrated planning process, and that integrated planning process should involve the women's ministry as well, so that there is gender mainstreaming and there's social justice mainstreaming. What do I mean by gender mainstreaming? I mean that everything that is planned, there should always be a question asked, what will be the impact of this on men and women? Because the outcomes are differentiated because the circumstances are different.
That was the chair of the Social Justice Commission at Stellenbosch University. This is Professor Thuli Madonsela. Thank you so much for coming on to News at Prime tonight.